Hello, students. Let's work a few more problems from chapter 2, this time from 2.4 and 2.5. By the way, this is the end of the test material for chapter 2, so if you're having any questions or problems, please be sure to let me know. All right, let's look at constructing a Venn diagram given this group of sets that we have here. Our universe is defined by the top line. And then A, B, and C, we want to plot these on a Venn diagram. So let's start by looking at what they have in common. Okay, so if I look at set A and what it has in common with both B and C, I'm looking for elements that are in A, B, and C. Well, toaster is not, blender is not, iron is, dishwasher is not, washer is not, dryer is not in all three. So just iron is in the intersection of all of them. Okay, now if I look at the intersection of A and B, we know that toaster and blender are not there, but dishwasher, iron, just dishwasher and iron, both of those are. So let's do iron and dishwasher. Okay, if I do A and C, there's no toaster, no blender, but we have got the iron, dishwasher, nope, but we do have a washer and dryer. So iron, washer, and dryer. Okay, so we did all of them, A and B, A and C. Now let's do B and C. Okay, what do those two have in common? Dishwasher is not common to both. Iron is. Freezer is. Okay, so notice that when I look at my grouping here, iron was in all three of them. Dishwasher is common to A and B. A and C have iron, washer, and dryer in common. And then B and C have iron and freezer in common. Okay. All right, so now whatever's not crossed out needs to be in that set, but not in the others. Notice that everything's crossed out in B. So B is entirely inside the intersections of A and C. So I'm going to draw A here, and I'm going to overlap with C here, and then we want a big overlap with B. Notice I don't need much of B on the outside because there's nothing outside of A and C inside B. Okay, so now let's do the first one. In all three is the iron. So I'm going to put my iron here where it's in all three circles. Then in A and B, we have the iron. Okay, now A and B is this piece, right, where the two overlap. So iron's already in there. We just need dishwasher. So dishwasher would go here because it can't go inside where it overlaps with C. Okay, in A and C, we have iron and washer and dryer. Oh no, I didn't leave much room here. I got to fit in washer and dryer right up there. Should have made that a little bit bigger. Okay, that's washer and dryer. I know it looks like scribbles, but it really says washer and dryer, trust me. Okay, B and C. B and C is where those two circles overlap. I need iron and freezer. We've already got iron, so I'll put freezer here. Okay, now I wrote down iron, freezer, iron washer dryer, iron dishwasher. And now let's write the items that are in the sets that are not already on the paper. So in set C alone, we have microwave oven. So that's right here, microwave oven. And And in set A alone, we have toaster, and blender. Okay, that's everything that's in all of the sets A, B, and C. So now everything in U that's not crossed out needs to go in the box, but not in the circles. That would be refrigerator and food processor. And this is a rough sketch diagram. Once I've completed this, I'd go back and draw it a little nicer. In particular, I'd want this section right here to be a little bit bigger so I can fit both words in there and not have to read scribbles. All right, let's look at the next one. All right, so I want to use the Venn diagram to describe the sets in roster form. Okay, so my universe, first of all, is everything inside the box. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and that looks like everything. So roster form just lists out the elements. We started with 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, and we're done. That's my complete set that describes the universe. Okay, now let's look at C. C is everything inside this circle. So that would be 2, 3, 4, 5, no 6, 7, and 8. All right, now let's look at A or C. A or C, A is everything inside this circle, C is everything inside this circle. All right, so we got to get all of those numbers. So that looks like 2, 3, 4, 5, not 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Because that's inside of A right there. 10, not 11. We do have 12, not 13 or 14. So we're done. All right, A and C. A and C is where those two circles overlap. So where do these overlap would be everything that is right here. This is the overlap of A and C. So that looks like, and I scribbled over it, so I got to erase my scribble to double check, but I think I only see 2, 4, and 7. Yep, 2, 4, and 7 in that overlap. That's A and C. So A or C, we listed right up here, this third line. So the complement is everything that I didn't list in that set. That makes it easier on me. 1's not there. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is not there. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 is not there. 12, 13, and 14. Visually, if I look at A or C complement, it's everything that is not inside the circle of A or C. So it would be all of that stuff over the peak. Okay, I want to use Venn diagrams to determine whether the following statements are true or no, following statements are equal for all sets A, B, and C. Okay, no problem. So I want to know, is this statement equal to this statement? Let's look at it. So if I have a Venn diagram, A, B, and C, and if I do A, okay, so let's start with the parentheses and work our way out. B and C. B and C is the intersection of B and C. So where they overlap for B and C would include this. Or A would be everything that's in A. All of this. Okay. So B and C over here, B and C would be this, right? Again, or A, exact same thing. The circle that I'm coloring in the same area. So yes, this is true, right? These are equal. All right, let's look at the second one. All right, so we're going to start again with a Venn diagram of A, B, and C. A, B, C. Do you love my perfect circles and Venn diagram? I'm an artist at heart. I have wonderful drawings. Really, those are circles. Okay. A or B. A or B means everything in A or everything in B, right? So we got to color in all of the circle A, all of the circle B. And B or C. Well, B or C means all of the circle B. Let's change colors. All of the circle B, all of the circle C. So the and is where they overlap, right? The and is what the purple and the pink have in common, which is really terrible to see with all my scribbles. But we see that overlap happens right in here, right? Where our pink and purple is overlapping, right? Would be that area in there. Okay. So let's look at this statement. All right, so we're gonna change colors again. Let's change to blue. All right, A and C is where A and C overlap. That's this dark area here. Or B would be this area over here. That's the exact overlap of the pink and purple, right? So it's the same. So yes, this is also true that those two statements are equal. The dark blue and the pink purple overlap are happening in the same place. Okay, let's see what's going on here. A survey of 108 high school students determined whether they used Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. The following information was determined. Okay, let's see. We've got let's draw our diagram. So this will be my Instagram. That's an I. This will be my Twitter and my Facebook. Okay, all three was 22 of them here. Used Instagram and Facebook. So Instagram and Facebook would be the overlap of those two circles right here and here. Okay, so if I'm overlapping those two circles, we've already got 22 of them in that overlap. So 45 minus 22 would be 23 are left over here. That makes a total of 45 in the overlap. All right, 38 use Twitter and Facebook. So Twitter and Facebook overlap is here. Again, we've got 22 of them already. So 38 minus 22 is 16. That overlap in Twitter and Facebook. Instagram and Twitter. Instagram and Twitter is 34. We've already got 22 of them, so 12 are up here. All right, 75 used Facebook. Well, I've already got 23 plus 22, that's 45, plus 16 is 55, 61. 61 out of 75 leaves 14 over here. See what I'm doing? Let's do it again with Twitter. 58 people use Twitter. I've already got 16 plus 22 plus 12. So that's 34, 40, 50. 50 away from 58 leaves 8 out here using Twitter. All right, 68 used Instagram. So 23 and 22 is 45. And the 12 would be 57. So 57 from 68 leaves 11 using Instagram. Okay. So how many people only used Instagram? 11 of them, right? Because that's out here and not in any of the circles. Instagram and Twitter, but not Facebook. That's only 12 people that did that. Instagram or Twitter. Instagram is everybody in the Instagram circle. So that's 11 plus 12 plus 22 plus 23. So 45, 57, 68 Instagrams plus the Twitter. Okay, we already counted this 12 and 22, so I'm only going to add the 16 and the 8, which is 24 to the 68 for the Instagram. So this one should be 68 for the Instagram plus 24 more for the Twitter users. And that's 92 people who did that. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I pointed to the wrong place. Instagram or Twitter was here. Okay. Instagram or Twitter, but not Facebook. Well, we just did Instagram or Twitter. That's the 92. So let's just subtract off the people from Facebook. People from Facebook are 23, 22, and 16. All of them used Facebook. So that's 45, 55, 61. So 92, this one, D, is 92 minus 61. Oh, what would that be? 31? All right, exactly 2 of the social media. Here we're using 2 of the social media. Here we're using 2 of the social media. Here we're using 2 of the social media. Not here. This is 3 of the social media because it's in all 3 circles. So for this one, I'm going to do 12 plus 23 plus 16. That would be 39, 51. And there you have it. All right, guys, if you have any questions or problems, please be sure to let me know. Otherwise, good luck with the homework. Good luck with the test. Keep in touch and let me know what's going on with you.